Hey fellas, how's it going? Welcome back to BTM, to the Basketball Time Machine, the podcast with former NBA players about former NBA players. Before we get to today's guest, just a little reminder, if you want to hear more podcasts like this one, just make sure you hit that subscribe button so you always get notified once we upload a new podcast. All right, so let's go. Today's guest was not only the Rookie of the Year, but also two-time NBA All-Star, Terry Cummings. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sean.
Terry, who was your favorite player as a child?
I grew up with a natural affinity toward Dr.J, Julius Erving, not just for his style, but for also the way he carried himself on and off the court.
Do you have a favorite team too? Was it the 76ers then, or the Nets?
No. Then I've always been, loyal to my home teams, the Bulls, even though they weren't as good a team as those teams would be in the 80s with Michael Jordan. They had Mickey Johnson, Artis Gilmore, Norm Van Leer, Jerry Sloan. They had a really good crew of guys, that were on that team, and we always followed our home teams.
Nice. All right. So you were drafted in 1982 by the San Diego Clippers, and you were the second pick. Were you satisfied being number 2?
Well, at that point in my life, I just wanted to play ball, and I've been playing against professionals since I was 16. So it was, I was really eager to get into the league and see if I could really play with these guys, but I knew I could. I just wanted to get there and do it. So, I wasn't disappointed. As a matter of fact, that year, the draft, the first three picks were really interchangeable. The Lakers had the first pick, the Clippers had the second, and the Hawks had the third pick. And they were all kind of going back and forth with who was going to be number one. The Lakers were wine and dining all three. And then they chose James, and then everything fell in place after that. I went number 2, and Dominique went number 3.
Could you imagine having played for the Lakers or the Hawks?
Well, not now. I mean, I thought, looking back at it now, James was probably the best fit. I mean, I think that myself, I would have fit too, because what they really needed in a small forward, big forward kind of cat, that was what I was. I could do the running and, fill the lanes, and then I could also rebound and thirdly be an enforcer for that team. But, that was the best choice. I thought he was the best fit for them at that time.
Okay, but still, that you would have had like 10,000 points more if Magic Johnson would have been your point guard, right?
You probably scored a lot easier. I mean, the thing is I'd always been able to create my own offense too, and that was always important. With Magic really handled the ball a lot, and he got the ball to people where they could score quicker.
Do you remember your first NBA game?
I want to say, yeah, it was in Milwaukee.
All right.
I think my first game was in Milwaukee because I missed all of training camp and the first few games of the regular season because of contract negotiations. And I think the first game I played was in Milwaukee.
All right. Were you nervous? You remember that?
More excited than anything. I've always been a cool, calm kind of dude. So, when it came to balling and life itself, I always looked at things as what they were.
So your team had some pretty good players, Tom Chambers, Bill Walton, Craig Hodges, just to name a few. But for whatever reason, you guys didn't make the playoffs. What was missing on that team?
It was a mixture of us young guys who were coming in, because myself, Ricky Pierce, Craig Hodges, a lot of the young guys, Derek Smith, came in together in that year. But the flip side of it was a lot of older guys who were on their way out. So you had, guys who just kind of measuring their time before they leave. And then you had the younger guys who were real inspirational in the sense that we wanted it. But, you had to get both those groups together. And it didn't happen with that team, And San Diego was a different place back then, but they had a lot of culture. But I didn't like the losing. I lost more games in the first week with Clippers than I had in 3 years in college.
Personally, your rookie season was sensational. You almost averaged like 24 points and 10.6 rebounds a game. How proud were you winning the Rookie of the Year award?
I thought it was a tremendous honor on a team that had lost as much as we did, and then at the end of that year, I had some issues with the heart and was really contemplating not playing anymore. And so, in lieu of all of that, I thought it was really a tremendous, it was a gift. I worked for it, but it was a gift, and I've never taken it for granted.
So after another year with the Clippers, you played for the Milwaukee Bucks alongside Sidney Moncrief. How was that experience playing for the Bucks in your first season?
Well, that was my really coming out growing up. Terry Cummings, playing for Don Nelson and playing with the Sidney Moncriefs, Paul Pressey's, Jay Humphreys, the different kind of cats, Paul McKeskey, Brewer, all of those guys. Grew up as a man because pretty much that was the team that most of the guys on that team were married, as was I at the time, and had children. And it was a very settled environment. And we were a team that did pretty much everything together. So it was really unique, and it was what I had aspired to thinking that real teams were like, and the Milwaukee Bucks were.
Yeah. The 80s to me were always the decade of superstars. You had so many great players who didn't even make the All-Star team. So my question is, how proud were you making the All-Star team, having so much competition on your position?
Well, it shows because, I played 18 years and I only made the All-Star team 2 years. But before I had the ACL surgery in my 9th or 10th year, my numbers were as good or better than pretty much all the other power forwards and small forwards, but you only make it 2 out of those years. It speaks to the political environment of the NBA, but it also speaks really loudly to the level of competition for those spots on All-Star teams.
Do you remember your first All-Star game? Do you remember your first All-Star game? Like feeling like were you just excited? Were you just honored to be there? Yeah. What was the feeling?
I was really excited because a lot of people were there that I grew up following. Julius Erving was on that team. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was in that All-Star game. Magic Johnson, Larry Bird. A lot of the guys that, you grew up and you really had a respect for it. I hadn't been playing against them in the season, but the All-Star game is different because, that's your peers saying that they think a lot of who you are and what you do, because if you don't get voted on on the first team, then it's all your peers. Those reserves are picked by the coaches and the peers, who have an appreciation for your talent and your ability.
The mid-'80s were also filled with monster teams like the Lakers, the Celtics, the 76ers, and for whatever reason, the Bucks always seemed to me like the most underrated team of the 80s because of those strong competition teams. What was it like playing against those teams that basically had like a starting lineup full of Hall of Famers? What was that like?
Well, for us, it was just great competition because, I think the thing that we missed the most in Milwaukee was that we had not made the cross over the threshold into the finals and things like that. We were a team that was very capable, but had never made it with the Milwaukee Bucks. And part of that was because of the Bostons, the Philadelphias. Chicago wasn't really there yet. But there were a lot of teams in the East. And when you played in the East in the 80s, you had to limp out of the conference finals into the championship series because you got beat up and you had to play on a level that the West Coast teams more or less were running and up and down the court. Wasn't a lot of physical contact. But the East Coast in the 80s was like a brawl, coming out of the playoffs. And so I thought that the best players, and I mean this in totality, that played at one time, played in the 80s and in the early 90s.
Absolutely.
They were best players and the best teams, and it was the most parity that the NBA had ever had at that time. And I always thought that when a team went out of the East to play in the West, they went to represent all of the East because all of the East had put bumps and bruises on them to get there. And it was the nature of the game. Smarter players, more educated players, understood the history of the game, knew each player on every team and knew what each player was capable of. We were students, of what we did, much more than probably now.
Yeah, you just mentioned the East being so physical. I was just wondering, um, you were one of the guys who was feared among the league. I remember a story of Chris Webber, who said that he once grabbed his arm and he had never felt such a strong grip from somebody. How was it for somebody like yourself playing against the Detroit Bad Boy Pistons? Like, were they also trying to play with you? Let's call it play with you and get in your head, or did they rather, not with Terry Cummings, not such a great idea? How did that work?
No, they played their game. When we played Detroit, we always knew that you could not play an organized concept of what we do. And what we did was we ran our whole offense in Milwaukee. But with Detroit, you couldn't do it because Detroit was physical and they were dirty at the same time. And so they would get you off your rhythm and your timing, which is when you're running an offense, it doesn't appear to be, but it is more about timing and rhythm than it is about the play itself. Like, you got to get the timing of the play down and the rhythm of every player doing what they're supposed to do when they're supposed to do it, so that the play runs correctly. With Detroit, we always knew going in, you have to think of it as a street brawl in street basketball. And don't go in there trying to be precise and perfect, because it's not going to happen. So you got to give an extra count on running offensive plays because you're getting bumped. But we played the same way on the other end against them. We knocked them off their offense, you know. And those two teams were very physical with each other.
Yeah, nice. In 1989, your last season with the Bucks, you averaged 23 and 8, and yeah, you make it to the All-Star team again. Was that feeling different because it wasn't your first All-Star game? Do you feel more like, okay, I really belong here? The first one was no accident. I'm back here.
Well, I always thought, you know, about me, Sean. I just always felt like I never let people predetermine the value of who I am as a man or as a player, because I realized there were too many other ancillary things that went into, you know, accumulating that value. So that when you got to the league, you learn right away that there were politics. You learn right away there were favorites. You learn right away that, you know, if you're not flamboyant and flashy, you're not going to get as much attention. And that was cool with me because I knew who I was. I understood the man, even back then as a younger man. And that was what really sustained me through everything, is that I wasn't looking for them to tell me how good or bad I was. I knew, you know, I knew by the look on the guys' eyes every time I got on the court and they had to stick me, or I was sticking them. I knew who I was, you know.
All right. The early 90s, you joined the Spurs. You and David Robinson were, probably the leaders of that team. How was it coming from the East Coast, suddenly playing on a West Coast team and having such a dominant big on your side?
It was different because my transition to the West Coast was the transition of a lot of guys who were coming from East Conference to the Western Conference. And we were changing the way the Western Conference played because we brought the physical play from the East to the West with us. But David was a West Coast kind of player. Sean Elliott was with that team, another West Coast kind of player. And then we had Willie Anderson that year.
Vinny Del Negro.
Vinny Del Negro was there. And Rod Strickland was the point guard the first part of that year. And I think Mo Cheeks came in through a trade, the second part of it. But we had a great team, just a lot of young talent. And that year was an amazing year, that first year, and I just really thought we had a chance, but we were really too young, you know, to really get things going. But I enjoyed moving to San Antonio. I got traded and didn't know I had gotten traded. I was on my way, I think, to church and got a call that I had been traded from Milwaukee to San Antonio, and I did not want to go to San Antonio. But I calmed myself down and reminded myself that, you know, this is the profession that you choose to be a part of. You get yourself together, get focused, and you get there because, you know, for this to happen, God has a plan for your life that you can't see. So just submit to it. And it turned out to be a blessing.
Oh, I love it when people realize that God has a plan in everything he does. So good to hear. From God to Moses, you play with Moses Malone. I think it was his last
Yeah,
season.
you ever played with him? I forgot about that in San Antonio, but he was a good guy, a funny guy too. But I had the experience of playing against him for a good 10, 12 years when he was in Philly.
You also feel that he's underrated?
Yeah, because of Jabbar and some of the other talent that was there, but Moses was not underrated among players. Among the players, they knew you better pack a lunch when you come to play against him because he's real active and he was really energetic and very formidable as a player. By no means average.
Since it was his last season, did he still have the same working ethic, like still doing the best he could, even though I think he was like 40 or 41 in his last season?
Well, I think, for the most part, yeah. I mean, at that point in his career, nobody was expecting him to score 20-something points and get 15, 16 rebounds. He would just come in and give David a break. And because Tim hadn't been there yet. Tim came about 4 or 5 years later. So, yeah. But he can hold his own. He can get in the game. You give him the ball, he can still give it to you.
You just mentioned you played 18 seasons in the NBA, which is, especially nowadays, that's unheard of. You also mentioned your physical problems that you have had in your early NBA career. How do you still make it playing 18 seasons? What was your secret?
Well, first and foremost, always I say it's my commitment and my belief, in Christ Jesus, because it gave me an energy and a focus that was away from, the disability of what people thought I had, and it gave me ability instead. I remember a reporter asking once, he was reading down my stats for the first 7, 8 years or so, and he said, well, correct me if I'm wrong. He said, you're supposed to have some kind of heart condition or something, right? I said, yeah, I'm supposed to. He said, but your numbers are more consistent and just as consistent as all the superstars in the league. He said, so if you have a heart condition, every player in this league needs to have one, But I've always prided my play on discipline of consistency. People need to know when they pay you for something that they're going to get their money's worth every night. It may not be the same numbers, but it will be the same effort, the great effort every night to let people know that this, I want to earn my money. I want to earn who I am and what I am and what I am to be. And for me to play 18 years after that rookie year where I was told I would never play again, I played 17 more years. So the inspiration of it is my faith. And then the second part of it is the discipline to maintain it at all costs. Be consistent.
Terry Cummings, thanks a lot for being on the show.
No problem. I appreciate you reaching out.